Moore, Kellen in Dallas. I know it's bad, but that's okay. We'll discuss it on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive your $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are breaking down even more head coaching news for the Dallas Cowboys. Get it? Okay. Let's talk about Kellen Moore, who the Cowboys have sent in an interview request. The expectation is that they're going to do a virtual interview at some point this weekend before the Eagles play. Not a shocker at all that the Cowboys decided to interview Kellen Moore. First of all, what are your thoughts on the Cowboys even interviewing him?
No, first of all, you're killing me with all these bad puns. They're just terrible. Second of all, look, no surprise. I mean, look, we've been throwing his name around since this has come around. It just makes a ton of sense, you know. Again, it kind of satisfies a lot of the prerequisites that we talk about with the Jones family and what they're looking for. I think as far as coaches that likely have a shot to getting the job, this is probably the situation in which you have the most kind of modern thinking offensive coordinator attached to this situation. Again, I understand Kellen Moore. We can talk about the pros and cons of those offenses and about that. But I think, you know, the selling point is what is the best that the Dallas Cowboys have looked in the last decade, right? Like, and it's probably when Kellen Moore and Dak Prescott were cooking in the early part of that, was it 2022 season?
I was going to say, in 2022 playoff game against Tampa Bay is probably the best they've looked in the last decade.
Yeah. So I do think that, wherever you want to say it, the offense specifically has been at its best when Kellen and Dak were working together. I think that's what is the easy selling point here, as well as the familiarity with the Jones family and, a certain amount of the unknown, because I think that's like when you're looking at all the kind of candidates that the Cowboys are looking at, it's a lot of known quantity, which I think is a draw for the Jones family. But as a fan of the Cowboys, I kind of would like to see some unknown in the coaching staff, just because it feels like you're going to places that you haven't been to before. So you need to do things differently in a way that it hasn't been done. So I'm excited to see how serious they are with the Kellen Moore situation. I certainly think it's probably in the top 3 of my realistic situations for the Cowboys head coaching. Next head coach.
Just to show like how long it's been since we've seen something new. Jason Garrett was on Wade Phillips' staff before he became the head coach. He was the offensive coordinator, right? Jason Garrett was the head coach from 2010, interim coach, all the way to 2019. Kellen Moore was on that staff as the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach at the time, played under him. They hired McCarthy, but they were insistent that Kellen Moore stay on staff. And it's been a lot of the same. So hiring Kellen Moore would feel like, okay, we're not making major changes. We're keeping some familiarity here. Dak already knows him well. The players know him well. We'll make some minor changes on the edge, with some of the positional coaches, but it feels very much like more of the same. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I do think they have a lot of good things going for them. But if you're wanting like some big changes to really turn this franchise around, I don't think that's Kellen Moore.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the scale of all of these candidates, for sure. But I think on the scale of candidates that are likely to come to Dallas, I think that's Kellen is on the far end of where things will change, right? So I definitely agree. Like, this isn't the same thing as hiring Ben Johnson, right? Or
no.
But I think on the scale of candidates that are likely to come to Dallas, it's probably Kellen Moore and then maybe Aaron Glenn.
So I have a lot of concerns about Kellen Moore, and we don't need to go into them today. But here's the question I have for you: is if the Cowboys were to hire Kellen Moore, and again, I think he is the favorite to get this job.
Yeah.
If they were to hire Kellen Moore, how does this work? Like, how does Kellen come in and be the head coach that the Cowboys need to kind of take them to this next step?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, obviously the next part of that question is the same for all these coaches. Is who are you bringing in for your assistants? Who's leading your defense if you're the offensive coach? Offense if you're the defensive coach. I think obviously the defensive coordinator is the next big hire, right? Who's coming in? The good news is as we've described, if you hire an offensive coach, there are a ton of extremely qualified high-end defensive coordinators available. Probably several of which who have some experience with Kellen Moore. We mentioned Brandon Staley, who hired him at the Chargers, who's currently, I think, assistant head coach for the 49ers, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah.
And then a laundry list of folks that are interviewing for head coaching jobs. There's probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 qualified defensive coordinators that are like being kind of kicked around as head coaching nominees, and there's only, I think, 3 jobs left, if I'm not mistaken, 4 jobs left. So there's the musical chairs is going to stop on this eventually, and there's going to be a whole bunch of really talented defensive coordinators. So I think if Kellen is the coach, you're going to be set at defensive coordinator one way or another. You're probably going to be able to find someone of good quality. The question then becomes, is Kellen the play caller as well? Which I would imagine he would be. I think you probably still need to bring in a very strong offensive coordinator to kind of be the sort of day-to-day guide, similar to what Schottenheimer was doing for McCarthy, right? Just kind of be the organizing principle for that side of the ball, because Kellen is going to obviously have to kind of bounce back and forth between both sides. So I think the way that you kind of break through the ceiling that the Cowboys have kind of hit their heads against is you kind of further unleash the Kellen Moore offense with Dak. You kind of go back to where you were with Kellen previously without the restrictions that McCarthy may have put on you at that point. And you just kind of further unleash that offense onto the world and see what effect it has on the team. I do think there's obviously some personnel stuff that needs to be done to kind of get you back to where you need to be in order to execute that. But I think that, if you're asking like what's different, like what could be the thing that kind of helps them break through, I think it's the opportunity to have the Kellen Moore offense with Dak Prescott without the restrictions of McCarthy kind of keeping a ceiling on things.
So one of the things that's really fascinating to me is Kellen Moore's never been a head coach in the league, which means he doesn't really have a bunch of staff members already lined up. I mean, maybe he does, but it's not like McCarthy that could grab a bunch of guys from the Packers and bring them over here.
Yep.
He would have to hire his own staff. One of my fears is that wouldn't happen. And I think Jory Epstein, I believe she was the one that said the Cowboys could hire Robert Saleh first before they even hire a head coach, because they don't want Saleh to get a defensive coordinator job elsewhere, right? Hire him first and then hire your head coach, which is not all that dissimilar from what they did back in 2007 when they hired Jason Garrett before they hired Wade Phillips. Now, I think a pairing of Robert Saleh like in Kellen Moore would work. Like, and I think you could put a couple of different names in there. I think Mike Zimmer and Kellen Moore could work. But it's just one of the big problems this franchise has is not letting the head coach pick out the staff. If you hire Kellen Moore, I want him to go out and get the guys that he wants to work with, not the guys that are being forced upon him to work with.
My counterpoint to that is who hired Mike Nolan? Who hired, and look, and it's also sort of the same argument with this whole thing about like McCarthy feeling like he had to leave because they wanted to try to bring Jason Witten onto the staff. Like, I mean, Mike McCarthy brought in his own Jason Witten to be the linebacker coach around here for 5 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, each one of these coaches has kind of their own like pet coach that they're bringing along here. So I understand. I think you're not wrong in the sense that it's important to let the coach, have their say in who they're coaching. Then again, like, like I said, the first coach that Mike McCarthy hired was Mike Nolan, and the one coach he didn't hire was Kellen Moore, who was the best coach on his staff probably those first few years. So I do think that there is something to that, but I also think that it can work out in the end if things go well, especially if the coach the first time coach who may not be as experienced in doing some of these kind of hires. Maybe it will help to have a more experienced voice kind of helping him get through some of the hiring process with this.
Can we hire Jeff Stoutland to be the offensive coordinator, promote him from the Eagles offensive line coach to offensive coordinator?
I'll offer the same job to Mike Munchak if he wants to come be the.
At least Kellen and Stoutland have worked together. Which
that's right. I don't know what it would take to steal Stoutland away.
I don't think he would leave.
I'll give that $8 million buyout for Deion's contract directly to Stoutland if he wants to come be the offensive line coach for life with the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, speaking of Deion, we got some more news regarding primetime. Let's talk about that news next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is $300 to keep the action going. I love the FanDuel app. It's so easy to navigate, and there's so many different bets that keep the game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or you're just looking to add some more excitement and drama to the NFL playoffs. FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Now that we got the Kellen Moore nonsense out of the way, let's talk about the real coaching candidate here, Deion Sanders. Now, we got a report from Ed Warder this morning, and this is the exact tweet. It says, regarding Deion Sanders, I'm being told that he would almost certainly accept Jerry Jones's offers to make him the next head coach, that those around him are encouraging him to pursue it, and that the Joneses are enamored by the idea.
I mean, again, you have to read the wording on this. I wish it wasn't the case, but you have to really read the wording on some of this stuff. I'm being told, not Deion told me or Deion says this. I'm being told, I hate having to parse stuff like this, right? This is not football analysis. This is trying to figure out what spin is and everything. But I think at this point, look, it's going to be a lot of talk until we start seeing some actual movement here, right?
Well, I think if we get an interview with Deion, that's to me, that would be the first sign that this is real. But I think a lot of this, again, I don't want to accuse anybody of lying because that's not what's happening here. A lot of times people like Ed Warder are being told actual information. Exactly. And maybe even Deion is telling Ed, hey, I'm interested in the job and would take it. I'm putting that out there because Colorado hasn't improved their offer, right? So
yes.
Again, Ed's information could be absolutely correct, but what Deion's telling him or whoever's telling him might not be correct as well.
Yeah. I mean, Ed, Ed's job is to transcribe what's being told to him and then relay that information to you. Ed doesn't have a scale to weigh Deion's heart, whether it's full of lies or not. Obviously there is a chance here, as we've discussed, that this is all a media ploy in order to, like you said, kind of leverage Colorado into another contract for Deion. And if that's the case, then of course Deion is going to answer the questions in a very sly manner in order to kind of continue that, facade that this is what's happening. Oh, I practically have one foot out the door. I practically started looking for houses. Oh wait, I already own a house in Dallas. Well, I don't need to look for a house in Dallas.
There's also part of this, maybe Deion doesn't know yet either, and maybe he just wants to learn more, and he wants to see through back channels. Hey, what would this look like? And one of the things that I'm hoping, if this is real, why we haven't heard some news yet, is Deion is trying to figure out like what his staff might look like. So when he goes into an interview with Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, he can present, hey, this is who I have lined up as the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. This is why you need to give me all the money that I'm asking for.
Yeah, and I listen. I think that's a good thought, Deion, because I know at this point I'm going to need some pretty big names to kind of move heaven and earth to come get you out of Colorado. So I still have not heard a good football argument for Deion Sanders as the coach, right? Like I think again that argument could change if Deion uses his superpower, which is to draw talented folks around him to his situation. If he's goes out there and gets some super awesome names for a defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, I think that changes the angles a little bit. But as of right now, like there's no interview scheduled. Deion is still under contract with a major college football program that has a deal in place that includes a buyout clause. So until there is any sort of actual real movement, an actual interview set up, an official channel being linked between these two, this is still just a story that is, a friend helping out another friend to get a new contract until I get actual solid evidence of otherwise.
And that's the way that I feel. Like we knew that Kellen Moore was going to be an option. We got news today that he's getting an interview. We thought like Robert Saleh might be somebody that was going to get an interview. We got news that he's getting an interview. Until we get some more information about Deion actually taking a step to interview with the Cowboys, I don't want to brush it off as nonsense, but almost like I'm not going to be moved until we get some actual news.
There are actual rules in place in the way that these teams can contact these coaches. That's why I think this is a thing that's being missed, is that like, one of the things you saw coming out about the original tweet about Deion and Jerry having a conversation is that officials had to come out and say this was not an official, reach out. And that's because of the Rooney rules, because of other things.
Yep.
There are guidelines and rules about how these ownership teams are supposed to be reaching out to these coaches. So like let's not get caught up in, the kind of soft language that's being used to kind of fool us into thinking that this is something official until it is official. Once it's official, once you see Deion has accepted an interview request with the Dallas Cowboys, then we can start like really leaning into this. But as of right now, to me, I mean, just look at the timelines between this and Kellen Moore. We've been talking about the Deion situation longer, but there still is nothing official. Whereas Kellen Moore, yes, boom, suddenly as soon as the first thing you hear is there's an official request for an interview happening with Kellen Moore. Once you get that with Deion, then we can start talking about him as, a serious candidate on the level of Kellen and these other folks that have actually gotten a request to be interviewed.
So just to recap here really quickly, I would assume that you believe Kellen is a much stronger favorite to get this job than Deion. Is that correct?
I'm just stating the fact that Kellen is currently a candidate in which Deion is not a candidate until he gets an official interview to be official request to be interviewed. So yes.
Of those two names, which one do you prefer?
Between Kellen and Deion?
Yes. I
think on their face, Kellen, without a doubt, because again, it's a football-based move. Other teams will probably interview Kellen Moore. I don't understand the draw outside of the kind of media narrative stuff for Deion Sanders. However, I am willing to be swayed if more information comes out, like, oh, Deion brings this person with him. Oh, Deion brings that person. But on its face, just as a coach, I'm going to take the guy that actually has experience in the NFL coaching on some level, as opposed to the guy who's, kind of in college football to coach his sons and to lead young men, which is not exactly the same mission in the NFL.
Well, can I give you a quick reason why I would prefer Deion over Kellen?
Sure. Yeah.
You and I host a daily podcast about the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, again, yeah. I mean, I think, listen, that's the reason that we're talking about him, right? Like, absolutely, content is king, and that's the huge reason why I do think that you're continuing to hear fanfic created about this, because this is a media narrative that folks are not going to want to let go. It's too juicy. It gets tons of clicks. Listen, on the please click on my podcast side of Landon. Yes, absolutely. Okay, more Deion, but look, we try to be as honest and try to cut through a lot of the BS as much as we can. And that's what I'm doing here is, yes, of course, please click on our Deion videos. Yes, absolutely. But know that at the end of the day, I'm going to throw some cold water on it until it feels more real to me.
I can't wait for Deion to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. It's going to be so great. I'm so excited. Can't wait for it to happen. All right, let's talk about another coach that's actually interviewing for the Dallas Cowboys head coaching job, and that is Leslie Frazier. Let's talk about his chances next. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or maybe were paying for twice? It definitely happened to me. My wife and I were actually paying for the same subscription separately. I know it's crazy. We had several others that we were needed to track down that we didn't realize that we were paying. Rocket Money made it so easy to cancel them. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It'll monitor your spending and it'll help you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, we actually got another name that's going to be interviewing for the head coaching job, and they didn't make the first or second segment, which tells you a little bit what we think. But Leslie Frazier, the former defensive coordinator of the Bills, I think, where is he working now? Seattle under Mike McDonald as an assistant. What do you think about this interview?
I want to be clear. Everything I'm about to say has nothing to do with how I feel about Leslie Frazier or as a coach. Despite what I just said in the last segment, Leslie Frazier might have, despite having an actual interview scheduled, Leslie Frazier actually might have less of a chance to be the Dallas head coach than Deion Sanders at this point. I unfortunately think that this is a checking of the box of the Rooney rule hire. Unfortunately for Leslie, he has been a football for this kind of thing. It feels like, right? It feels like he's filled this role a lot. I made a joke before the show that Leslie probably picked up his resume and blew the dust off of it and just prepared to go head in like a soldier and interview again. But I unfortunately think that this is likely a show interview, as he's done several of these over the last, I would say, 4 years. And I just don't know that he's a serious candidate for getting this job.
It sucks for Leslie because he's actually a really good defensive coordinator. You look at the numbers that he's had over the last 5-10 years when he's been a play caller on the defensive side. They've been awesome. Now, his last game with Buffalo was a nightmare. It was that 21 or the 13-second game. But he's been really good. The problem is he hasn't been a head coach. Was he a head coach once with the Vikings a long time ago?
Yeah, the Vikings. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's in his mid-60s now. So here's my guess. I've got 2 thoughts here. Number one, I think Leslie Frazier is somebody that a lot of people around the NFL respect, and putting his name back in the cycle does him some favors, right?
Sure.
I also think that the Cowboys are looking at Leslie Frazier as potentially a defensive coordinator pairing with an offensive-minded head coach like Kellen Moore. I think that's very, very realistic. Here's my other thought. I also think the Cowboys know already who they're hiring because their first 2 interviews were Robert Saleh and Leslie Frazier. And as much as it sucks to say, it feels like they're just checking boxes so that they can announce who they want to hire early next week. But I wouldn't be surprised if Leslie Frazier is at the very tippy top of their list when it comes to defensive coordinator candidates.
Yeah, and let's be clear, it's disgusting. I hate that teams are trying to skirt this rule and clearly not, looking at these candidates realistically. When, listen, someone like Leslie Frazier probably deserves another shot at some point, especially with what we've seen, them just handing these out to just random folks who just finished their careers in the NFL at this point. So, I do agree, though. I think that this is probably a dual purpose interview, similar to what we saw with Saleh. I think Saleh is a much more likely actual candidate for both the DC and the head coaching job.
Probably.
Frazier's name, unfortunately, is probably pretty stale at this point. But, look, there's nothing to say that Frazier couldn't have a Dan Quinn type resurgence. I mean, he just spent this time in Seattle. Maybe he learned
or Mike Zimmer
tricks from Mike McDonald. Oh, yeah, exactly. Or Zimmer, right? Like where, it takes some time off, go kind of learn some new things, see things from a different angle, and maybe that changes the way that you it modernizes the way you call things. So I hate it for Leslie because I do think he's a good coach and I do think he knows football. I'm hoping that this interview at least kind of elevates his name and maybe he can parlay this into a defensive coordinator job or maybe even a head coaching job, who knows. But yeah, it does feel like for the Cowboys, Leslie Frazier is probably not a serious candidate for the head coaching job. But maybe you get that interview in, you get glad handing going, you get to know Leslie Frazier, the person, a little bit, with the idea that, hey, you know what, Leslie, we hired so-and-so as our head coach. He's an offensive guy, but we really like what you do on defense. Maybe you can come in and call the defense for us. I think that's a good plan to get like dual purposing out of your interviews as well.
I wish they wouldn't do this. Not no disrespect to Leslie, but I wish they would go out and interview more serious candidates. And maybe you'll be blown away by somebody. I mean, I remember go back 20 years when Mike Tomlin wasn't expected to get the Steelers job, but he was awesome in the interview, got that job. Or last year, everybody expected the Falcons to hire Bill Belichick, but Raheem Morris went into the interview and absolutely dominated and got the job. I wish they would be more open to having their minds change when it comes to some of these coaches. It doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, again, the ownership is very, very homogenous. It's all it's all a bunch of old folks that are probably very much set in their ways. So it's hard sometimes to get them to try things are different. But I agree. I wish more owners would take more chances. And I think they would find that when they do, that they'll have new and better kinds of success when they do that.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. I'm sure on tomorrow's show we'll have even more news about Deion and joining the Cowboys staff. Cannot wait for that show, Landon. We're just going to turn it into Locked On Primetime. It's going to be great. Follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.